Is now preparing to go live, and then once it goes live, I'll take like 30 seconds to set it up on the page. Meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. Cool. So there it is. Share. Post. Tag friends. Uh-oh. There you are. All right, it is on page 1, and then just approving it on the second page, and we're all good to go. All right, good evening, everyone. I hope you are doing well. Welcome to Natural We Community Hour of Power. I am so excited for our guests tonight. It is going to be a great time. We have actually been in the pre-community hour of power, just ready to go. So I'm very, very excited, and we'll introduce our guests in one moment. But first, we are going to just take a moment and breathe and be in the present moment as we start our community hour of power with a moment of mindfulness. So wherever you are, find a comfortable position, sitting. You can close your eyes or not, and just take a deep breath in and take a deep breath out. And you're going to take another deep breath in and take a deep breath out. And you're going to continue following suit. And as you continue to breathe deeply, I just invite you to think about the Black women in your life and just take a moment of gratitude for them as Black Women's Month, International Women's Month is drawing close. We just take a moment to thank our mothers and our aunts and our nieces and our sisters and our sister friends for all that they do, for the load that is carried, and for the smiles and the care and the nurturing. And so as we continue to think about them, we just honor them for a moment. And then we honor ourselves for being here. We honor ourselves for existing in this space and being our full, authentic selves, and for walking in our light and in our power and in our truth. And you're just going to take another deep breath in and one more deep breath out as you begin to breathe normally. And whenever you are ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you for joining our moment of mindfulness. And with that, hello again. Welcome to Natural We Community Hour of Power. Just a couple of quick announcements. Natural We Zoom tutoring is going strong. Thank you to all of our tutors. We love and appreciate you. Next week, we will have Natural We Zoom tutoring. And then the first week of April is Natural We Zoom tutoring spring break. So make sure you have on your calendars that April 5th through 9th, Natural We tutoring will be on spring break. We are also continuing our food bank. Thank you to everyone who has contributed and volunteered. We especially want to take a moment and thank Brother Mitch and Pastor Coleman, who do the deliveries, who make sure that we are able to get the food, who load up their trucks, things like that. So we are grateful. And you can check out the schedule on our social media page. We have 3 locations of the food bank about 3 times a week. So you want to make sure that you check that schedule. And with that, we are going to go straight into Hour of Power with Dr. Donna Nicol. We are so excited. She was born in Charleston, West Virginia, and raised in Compton, California. Dr. Nicol is an associate professor and chair of the Africana Studies Department at CSU Dominguez Hills. Go Toros, my alma mater. She is a third generation history major, earning her BA in African American Studies and History from CSU Fullerton, a MA in US History with a specialization in African American History from Long Beach. Dr. Nicol has taught middle school language arts and social studies in the LAUSD, and she also spent 7 years working in university administration as an academic advising director, grant project director, and coordinator of African American Student Services. She also received an MA in higher education administration and PhD in history and philosophy of education. Let's see. And Dr. Nicol has taught at Cal State Fullerton. And in 2021, very recently, she was the recipient of the Faculty Excellence Service Award at CSU Dominguez Hills. Her research focuses on 3 broad areas: African American history, African American educational history, and African American women's history. Her specific research focuses on race and conservative philanthropy, Black women's educational activism, and the cultural identity taxation of Black women faculty. She has a forthcoming book entitled Black Women on Board, Claudia Hampton, the CSU System, and the Fight to Save Affirmative Action, 1974 to 1994. And in it, she explores how Claudia Hampton, as the first Black trustee in the CSU system and the first woman to ever chair a university system board in the US, utilized Sliceability as an approach to protect and expand educational opportunities for students of color, women, and students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds against a growing backlash against affirmative action in the post-civil rights era. And finally, Dr. Nicol was a featured panelist in Al Jazeera English's Big Picture documentary, which examined the role of private money and philanthropy in shaping African Americans' access to education, healthcare, and political power. And so without further ado, welcome, Dr. Donna Nicol. We are so excited. I'm going to let you just introduce yourself in your own way.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for the invitation. I'm really delighted to be here. I guess what that introduction or bio doesn't say about me is that my roots in Compton and my roots at Dominguez Hills is actually quite, I have a long history with Dominguez. My mother graduated from Dominguez, earning her BA degree in history. As I said, I'm a third generation history major. My grandmother was also a history major. Her area was Chinese history. Don't ask. She spoke fluent. She spoke Mandarin.
Wow.
And then my mother's specialization was Latin American history, and mine is African American history. But my first full-time job out of undergrad was at Cal State Dominguez Hills. I actually worked for the Center of, it was called Internationalization and Cultural Diversity. It was an institute through academic affairs, and it was my job to help bring speakers from around the world to Dominguez. And so the year that I was there, we brought, it was right at the end, the beginning of the end of apartheid in South Africa.
Mm.
And so we brought in F.W. de Klerk and Botha, who were Botha represented the old guard, white South Africans who supported apartheid, and de Klerk was the first white president who was supposed to see the transition to a non-apartheid South Africa. And it was a fiery discussion. I remember them not getting along very well, to say the least. So that was my first full-time job was at Dominguez. And, you know, I grew up not far away in Compton, basically down Wilmington. So it's old stomping ground. And so when the opportunity came to come back to my old neighborhood and to work with more Black and brown students, I jumped at the opportunity. You know, I was at Fullerton for a decade, but I really feel like Dominguez is home and where I needed to be. So I'm grateful for that opportunity. And it's afforded me the ability to really do the kind of research that I want to do. I was in women's studies at Fullerton, and I felt a little boxed in there. Because of that. There was kind of an expectation that I wasn't going to deal with race kind of the way that I do in my work. But I can still do gender work in my role, but I can also really emphasize an analysis of race uh, in Africana studies in a way that I couldn't in women's studies.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And I just love the connection to Dominguez. And just, I guess we're going to just dive into your book real quick. So at Dominguez, there is actually a lecture hall called Claudia Hampton.
Mhm.
So how did it feel researching about Claudia Hampton while you're able to really walk on a campus that has a building named after her?
Yeah, well, I found out about her by chance, to be perfectly honest. I was in the archives at Dominguez looking up an organization that my grandmother had created called the Office for Black Community Development in the 70s, and didn't find anything, but went through this photo archive and saw this picture of this Black woman, and it said Dr. Claudia Hampton, trustee. And I was like, who in the world is that? And so I do what any person who's curious does. I went to Google and I Googled her. And what popped up was she was the first Black trustee in the Cal State system. And I said, wait a minute, doesn't Dominguez have a building named after her? I thought it was a building at the time. And then I realized that it was a pretty large classroom. And I said, okay, let me see if I can find anything written about her or whatever. As luck would have it, I found a 6-hour interview at the bottom of a box in the archive that hadn't been transcribed. And once I listened to it and transcribed it, I realized I have a story here about this woman and it needs to be told. And so it's been a long project. I'm not going to lie to you. Historical work is slow, and I was at Fullerton at the time, so I took a sabbatical in order to really delve deep into what I could find of her. And nothing has been written about her,
Mhm.
and nothing has really been written about the trustees. Most of what we get about education history is usually about presidents, maybe some student groups, but nothing about the trustees. And so I had an education learning about what the trustees did, how much power they have. I mean, all the way from if they didn't like a newspaper article at one of the campuses, they could slow funding
Mm.
to that campus. And so I spent probably about a year or two just trying to make sense of how do the trustees work, and then learning how this woman utilized her position as
Mm.
uh, the first Black trustee, and she was only the third woman to ever serve on the board, but she became the first woman in the nation to ever chair a board of trustees.
Wow, what a history.
Yeah.
So how did it feel? You're going into this archive to learn about your grandmother and the organization that she started, and then you stumble across this jewel and treasure trove. But in the back of your mind, were you still thinking about your grandmother or even your mom and thinking about this lineage of historians?
Yeah, I kept the project for my grandmother is one that is still kind of halfway written. I was just going back through to make sure I could confirm some things that I had written in the article. So, but I see a connection between these my grandmother's story and Claudia Hampton, because they were really trying to make sure that Black people had the services and access that they needed. Now, in my grandmother's situation, the Office for Black Community Development, she was one of the founders of this organization, was based in Watts, and their aim was to create a Black supermarket training program so that Black people could own their own grocery stores. And she and a couple of other people, a man by the name of Charles Daniel and another guy named Jerry Barnett, wrote a grant to Jerry Brown's Food Policy Council and received a $1.16 million grant in 1978, 79.
Mm.
Um, and created the first Black owned grocery store slash co-op across the street from the Imperial Courts projects.
Mm.
And I remember I was a little girl and they they wanted they needed to figure out a way to market this to people in the projects, and they just kept saying, okay, Donna, you're cute and little. So I had to learn an elevator speech and go around to each of the projects and explain that this store was opening and how it would work and stuff like that. So I got immersed in how to do community work with my grandmother pretty early. But the intent here was to make sure that Black people had access to food, because after the Watts Rebellion in '65, most of the grocery stores moved out of the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't get a grocery store in my neighborhood, which is on the edge of Compton and Watts, until 1987. We would have to go out of the community, go to Linwood or, go to Gardena in order to get groceries. And I see the connection because Claudia Hampton really utilized herself as the instrument to make sure she could protect African-American students and women and low-income students access to the Cal State system. So I didn't feel like like because I shelved the project on my grandmother that I'm losing something by doing this work on Claudia Hampton. I see this as a kind of continuum of Black women's work, community work.
As you're talking, I'm remembering when I was a student at Dominguez, we used to walk to Rouse off of University right there when we all lived in the dorms. And I remember when it was no longer Rouse, and I think it's like a 99-cent store or something like that. And so I'm thinking about Claudia Hampton, and what would she have said about here are these college students who don't have that easy access to go to the store and get some quality food, and the legacy of these systemic things that continues to happen. And then moving forward, we have a Black owned grocery store in Compton that has been celebrated and gone viral. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that Claudia Hampton would have, well, Dominguez was her favorite campus. And mostly, it's because it was the Black campus, and I was,
Historically Black college and university of the West, right? That was what people say.
yeah. And I mean, at the time she was in that position in '74, so that would have been kind of the height of Black, student enrollment at Dominguez. She would have been, I think that if someone had brought that problem to the trustees, and you got to understand that the trustees only talk about what the chancellor puts on their agenda. And
Okay.
so there's kind of, if they want to bring something outside, they have to bring it through committee. It's like a government process.
Right.
But Claudia Hampton would have tried to mobilize people to try to get greater access to even some kind of better kind of like building, getting like we have at Dominguez, well, when we were meeting, the farmers market and all of those sort of things, but making that much more regular. But the way in which she would go about it is, I talk about this idea of sliceability. So sliceability is this concept from a cultural theorist named Homi Bhabha. And Homi Bhabha says that there are multiple ways of resistance, and not all of them are radical. Sometimes you got to use other forms of resistance. In Claudia Hampton's case, she used charm and wit in order to destabilize, well, not destabilize, to get the white men on the board to agree with her. And so the things she would do, like she would cook dinner for white men, and I was just like, like when I first heard this, I was real cringy, like, oh no, sis, come on, why are you cooking dinner for these folks? And then I realized the genius behind it was that if she played to the gender norm, then they wouldn't focus on her being Black. And so when she made dinner for them in these meetings before the actual board meeting, they were already like, well, Claudia is wonderful. She was a great hostess. So whatever Claudia wants, we're going to support it. And so she would have she would have attacked the problem of, like say food insecurity for Dominguez students in a way that was very methodical. It
Mm.
wouldn't have happened right away. She would have gotten these people on board with her, and that would have taken, some time, but then she would have made sure that, these things were in place. I mean, if you and remnants of her are all over our campus and even in the system. The CAMS school that is on our campus,
Oh,
that's because of her.
really?
Yes, she wanted a feeder into Cal State Dominguez. LA Unified gave gave them a lot of grief, and so Long Beach Unified is in charge of CAMS. But that it's on our campus because of her. The forgivable loan program for doctoral students is because of her.
This
Uh,
the
huh? I'm
the
sorry.
the seated the chancellor's doctoral intensive program.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. Because the chancellor at the time was her name was Anne Reynolds, and Anne Reynolds was kind of despised because she was very in your face kind of thing, and they perceived her as being arrogant. And so Reynolds figured out they like Claudia, so let Claudia introduce this idea.
Okay.
Uh, they there was a Black STEM scholarship program. Claudia Hampton was the one who put that through.
Wow.
Uh, the expansion of urban education, where we would actually give scholarships to Black and Brown students to become teachers. That was because of Claudia Hampton. So, but she did all of this stuff while entertaining and hosting white folks.
Mm.
And so it's she's being civil, but she's slyly getting resources to the community.
And the strategy behind it. And think about it, you said that you cringed when you first heard it, and I heard it and I was like, nah, nah, but thinking about all of the maneuvering that needs to be done to get things across. We have a comment. Thank you to everyone who is watching. It says deceptive compliance. She had a job to do and she created a methodology of doing it. All praises. And we definitely give praise and latitude to Claudia Hampton for that. Just it's great. I'm actually in the seated program. So thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I managed to interview Anne Reynolds, and Anne Reynolds said I wouldn't have gotten half of the things through if it wasn't for Claudia Hampton, because she knew how to maneuver in a way. And Claudia Hampton came in, she was nominated by Reagan, and Reagan had a terrible relationship with Black folks. So she was an unlikely person to get that position. Now, I should say, prior to her becoming a trustee, she was the director of community and urban, I think it was, yeah, community and urban school relations for LA Unified when they were desegregating. And so it was her job to go into schools where you would have a very, like a difficult principal who didn't want to work with Black parents. And so she would put out public relation fires
Mm.
for the district. So she had skill already at doing this kind of negotiation. And where she learned a lot of it was ironically through the NAACP. Um, that was like one of her training grounds. She was very active in the education committee for
Mm.
NAACP. And she was also involved with the Council of Black Administrators through LA Unified. And so I say in the book, I talk about in the book, and I give examples of other Black women who used community organizations as a training ground before they went into predominantly white institutions. So they learned how to maneuver through every time somebody put up a barrier, they would learn at the community level how to maneuver around it, build a coalition, get resources. And so eventually, by the time she made it to the trustee, she was really well practiced at this.
This is one of the things where thinking about Black studies, Africana studies, we started talking about really being grounded in community and being able to root the activism and the intellectual part in community and not losing hold of that. And so here we have a wonderful example of holding on to those community roots.
Yeah, absolutely. So she served on the board for 20 years. And at no time could anyone say that she was not dedicated to the community, that, she stayed active in those community organizations that she was involved in. She lived in a Black neighborhood. She continued to be very, very invested in the community. And so I think that helped her not lose sight of the fact that why she was there was for the community. She says, I know I'm known as the affirmative action trustee,
Mm.
and she didn't ever shy away from that. She held that as a responsibility, and she used herself as the instrument and the vehicle, and she didn't have a problem with that. And I did a talk for Channel Islands about the book, and someone asked, this seems really exhausting work. And I said, yeah, it is exhausting work, but on the other on the other hand, what's the cost of not doing the work?
Right. Right. And so that's a good segue. And I'm leading this segue to be able to ask a question that's in our comment. I haven't forgotten about your question, Will. Um, so you were writing this book. You are chair of the Africana Studies Department at Dominguez Hills, which has just a legacy from, Dr. Little to Dr. Frusa, to the professors and faculty and students of OAS, of this work. So where do you situate yourself? Would you consider yourself a legacy of of Claudia Hampton and all of this?
I do, because I think about, um, particularly in the post-civil rights era, um, I think of my work as educational activism. I think of Black education as a response to white supremacy. I believe that, and I'm not talking about just education in predominantly white institutions. I'm talking about thinking about education as a way for you to do a critical analysis of the world so that um, you can respond in a way that is going to honor your humanity and to um, protect your community. I think a lot of times when we think about education, or when people talk about education in Black folks, they often think of it as just a vehicle to get a job.
Right.
But I don't think of it that way. I think of it as emancipatory, that it is a way to liberate yourself, and that you should take in as much education from as many different sources as possible. So I think back to when I was younger. My grandmother was a big influence on my educational journey. Um, she helped, put it, we went to the regular, well, we went to public school for a while, and eventually, she was like, you're not getting challenged enough, I'm gonna put you in this private Black school over here. But during the summers, my grandmother hand wrote lesson plans for us, and took us to the museum, and took us to, I mean, and free stuff, not anything that was expensive. I remember she made us watch on public television. She had us watching Carmen. I was like, I don't speak Latin, I don't know what's going on. She said, I will translate it for you. Like, really, really, woman? I remember as a little girl going to US organization meetings, uh, where Dr. Karenga was speaking. And so I had this kind of broad education, and we always had people coming into our house talking to us about, she would debate politics. And I'm sitting there ear hustling because I'm a kid and want to know what the grown folks are talking about. But it was a way for me to get a varied education. And when I became an administrator, I utilized a lot of the stuff that I had learned, to get resources for students, because I knew some of the backstory, I knew some of the historical context. So I think that, if I place my work and Claudia Hampton's work as activist work. And so I think of it as continuing that legacy, but I want people to really know who this woman was, that despite people wanting to get rid of affirmative action and to do away with Black studies, because this comes up while she's in that 20-year period, that she rode hard for us, but it didn't necessarily look like maybe a response from Angela Davis that you would get. And Angela Davis even says we need reformers and revolutionaries.
Right. Right. It's important to find your niche and make your contribution to the liberation. You have a comment in, I mean, a question in our chat. It says, how was your experience at a PWI in Orange County?
Bless your heart for that question. All right. So do you want it as the student side? Because I went to Fullerton as an undergrad and I also was faculty. So let's start with the student. Ah, yeah, that was interesting. My first year, no, I lived off campus most of the time. And I was in LA pretty much every weekend, you know, as much as I could be. Let's put it that way. It was it was Orange County. It's very, you know, it's very conservative. It's very white bread Americana. And I was in the history department and I was one of the few Black students in the history department. And then I saw, you know, the African, at the time they called themselves Afro Ethnic Studies. It was a kooky name, don't ask. But it was class Black Women in America. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna just take this class because I'm tired of being the only one in the room, having to almost defend, you
Mhm.
know, the whole community. And so I took that class and it was like, oh, thank God I found a place for me. And that's when I decided to double major. And so I could inform I, what I was taking from my Black Studies classes, I was taking into my history classes. And so when I was getting this kind of that really overt kind of racism, I could challenge it, but challenge it in a way where it wasn't just me being passionate or angry, but I was informed. And so that allowed me to have a community that I wouldn't have had if I just stayed in the history department. I became the editor of the Black student newspaper. So we had an alternative student newspaper because the other one was so god awful and racist. You know, I remember this one kid named, God, it's amazing what you remember. His name was Keith Buglewitz. And he wrote an article questioning Black History Month. Why do we have a Black History Month? And
Yeah.
so we responded with an article called Poor Little Discriminated Against White Boy Syndrome.
I love the title.
And we put his picture in the middle of it. And we said, has this white boy been wronged? You know, Black people, and it was it was satire, it was pure satire. And he was upset. And I said, but next time you will go and look up why we have a Black History Month. And then you won't ask questions like, why do you have a United Negro College Fund? We don't even use it here because we're at a predominantly white institution. So yeah, it was challenging until I found a community. And once I found that community in Black studies, then it was just like, okay, I can handle all of this.
Mhm.
Um, Now, the faculty side was I was a different animal because I came in as I was in women's studies and I was the first woman of color of any non-white woman that was ever hired full-time and then the first to ever get tenure and promoted. And you know how you have a honeymoon period and then it ends?
Yep.
Yeah, that's what happened. But I got along with everybody. I probably cussed everybody out at some point, but I got along with everybody for the most part. They respected me. But having to deal with the intersections of race and gender, um, I felt like I was the heavy in the room. I was always explaining and trying to make people understand that perspective, and that didn't feel good. Um, the students were wonderful. The students, you know, I love the students. Um, but the environment, and then the other thing with Orange County, and particularly at Cal State Fullerton, is there's a friend used to call California precious. which is this kind of fake nice where you don't really know where you stand with people because they're not like overt,
Right.
but they're not being genuine with you either.
Mhm.
And that was a lot of the feeling. Um, yeah.
So we've talked about, this activism work being exhausting. Even sly civility can be exhausting. So in this environment, how did you how did you manage? How did you stay sane?
Oh, well, like I said, part of it is, one, developing a community outside of either your school or your workplace. I never, even with my work at Dominguez, I never let the job define who I am. It is part of who I am, but it is not it. I have, you know, I have my dance and fitness community that I'm a part of. I have civic organizations I'm a part of. I have a sorority that I'm still very active in. So I stay engaged in ways that allow me to breathe. I spend time with my family, and I spend time away from them when necessary. Uh, and they spend time away from me too. Uh, so I just kind of I build in time for self-care.
Mhm.
And for me, self-care is not just, oh, I went to the spa and all this other type stuff. Self-care is saying no or saying yes to projects that really resonate with me, but only doing those things that I really love.
Mhm.
And I take that attitude at my work now. I mean, I just was interviewed about the faculty award that I just won, and the guy is just like, "How did you do all of this stuff?" And I said no to probably half of it, and I said yes to the things that I really enjoyed. And um, when I came into Dominguez, I had the book. The book was a project that was I had already like written some of it already, and so I made it clear, like I'm not coming up in there on Friday, so don't even ask.
Because
You know,
that's your writing day.
yeah, that's my writing day, and I put a marker down, and I've pretty much held fast to it, except for when I have faculty meetings once a month. But other than that, no, and it's non-negotiable.
Mhm.
So I think that's how I've stayed sane.
You have a response to the Black newspaper. It says, "Oh, so y'all were petty."
Oh, you should have seen some of those articles. We had one called "Apathetic Negroes on the CSUF Plantation." We had another one called "A Little Story of Pimps and Hoes," and it was a story about the black basketball coach at Fullerton. I'm not the black basketball coach, the white basketball coach of the black students at
Oh,
Cal Fullerton. We had another one called "White Women Ain't Minorities." Yeah,
oh, I need to read that.
that was woo, boy, but that was rough. Um, there was there were quite a few of them that we were like, right. Oh, we had another one where we took a picture of Eddie Rochester from Amos and Andy, and at the time the president of the university was Milton Gordon, black dude, real quiet, kind of awkward. Um, wouldn't really say much about race issues. He'd have a Black History Month event, but that's about it. So
Mhm.
they took that picture, and underneath it we put Milton Gordon is the oh no oh Afro Jenkins was the guest writer. We just made that up. So Afro Jenkins is a Rhodes Scholar and a recipient of the Milton Gordon Grits and Cornbread Award for Negro Journalism.
Oh, y'all were having fun.
Well, because we could do that because we were self-supported. We raised our own money. We had our parents. My grandmother was donating paper so we could print this thing. And we didn't distribute it in a central place. We would just pass it out. And it was like, everybody's like, I got to get one before they run out. So, because we realized really quickly that they could control what we said if we didn't have ownership of it. And so when I went back to Fullerton, I tried to get the students to stop taking money from ASI and from the university and raise their own funds. And they didn't have a level of hustle that we had at the time.
Yeah, because student activism is interesting. Um, you want to be active, especially when you get into these Black studies classes, these Africana studies classes. So you're ready to go. You're like, oh man, everything that we're talking about was when the BSU started. And if you look at the 10-point program, the Black Panther Party, everything, but you still got to go to class. And so you have to also think about any backlash from professors. And so really understanding the importance of community and being rooted in community in order to do these things while you make sure that you have the grades you need to really be um effective in your activism. Is It's an interesting role. It's an interesting, but it's fun. um Make great memories and wouldn't trade it for the world. And then it leads into your activism when you're a faculty.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing nowadays that the students have way more power than they recognize.
Yeah.
That because the university has become a business model, the students are the clients or the customers. And they're going to listen to the students way more than they're going to listen to me as faculty. And I think students need to realize their power, that if y'all stop showing up, this whole little operation falls apart. What happens is often the enthusiasm for the activism in the students ebbs and flows. That's the thing. So like I'm thinking about, the group that you came through, Dominguez, with. You guys were super active. Whereas right now, not so much, and so it's like herding cats right now, trying to get the students to, put things together. And so I don't know if it I don't know if it will take an event to get students more engaged or what it will take, but it can be challenging on our end trying to um, trying to reach the students so they will have that enthusiasm.
You want to reach them, you want to inspire while still giving room for their energy, for their creative ideas, while it's still rooted in the ideologies of what birthed Black studies and African studies. And so it's a it's an interesting poll. Hopefully they'll see this interview and be inspired. I think this is a good segue to talk about the Big Picture documentary.
Mm-hmm.
We are in an interesting time where the quarantine and all of this, although there's talk of going on back on campus, don't know exactly when, might be hybrid model. So if you could just talk about your role in terms of understanding the systemic issues that were part of that were talked about in the documentary and how it relates to our broad conversation now.
Okay, so the Big Picture documentary, typically, or Al Jazeera does these things once or twice a year, and they take a big issue and they try to like break it down into digestible parts. So for this one, the main thing was to look at private money and how does private money impact um, Black people. It was focused on Black folks. Um, and so some of the things that we talked about is how private money has structured education systems, how private money has impacted um, access to healthcare, how private money has really shaped uh, our political process. And so I was asked to be part of this because I do a lot of my work on conservative philanthropy, how conservatives have put money into the system in order to take out access for Black people. So my dissertation was about conservative philanthropy that was used to get rid of Black studies programs.
Mm.
And so a lot of times when we talk about philanthropy, we think about philanthropy as always being altruistic and trying to help people. I write about the philanthropy that was used against people. And so yeah, in the documentary, which is two parts, the first part kind of takes you up to 1970,
Mhm.
And then the second part goes from 70 all the way to the Capitol riots. Like literally, they cut out a section in order to put the Capitol riots in.
Really.
Uh, because it was just, yeah, it, once you see it, you understand why they put it in.
I'm halfway through, so I'm excited and I can't wait to talk to you about it. I was actually talking to a colleague who has a student who was at the Capitol riots. So
Oh, wow, wow, wow. Okay, not the brothers that were outside selling the shirts though. Not those brothers.
I'm not talking about them.
Okay, I'm mad where the money resides. Okay, all right. Anyway, so
That's not who was talking though.
but no, what the documentary, I mean, the aim is to really understand that a lot of the decisions or a lot of the ways in which Black people have been affected by our education system and our healthcare system has been ordered by this private money, and people have no awareness whatsoever that these folks were kind of moving and shaping, you know, our destinies with this money. And that money, it's called political economics, where you put money in to get the political outcome that you want. And
Mhm.
so I think about people like um what's his name, Walter, I think it's Walter Watkins, whose book, The White Architects of Black Education.
Mhm.
You know, so he writes about some of these folks, T. Thomas Fortune and, you know, the Phelps Stoke Foundations. I deal with the more contemporary people. So I look at the Bradley and the Olin Foundations. That, I mean, the Koch brothers, for example, I write about them. And then I write about the Black folks who have benefited financially from going out being their mouthpieces. So I have an article that just came out from on Al Jazeera called Activism for Profit. And it looks at how much money Ward Connerly, the guy who helped get rid of affirmative action in California, how much money he made. Um, and he made millions of dollars being the mouthpiece for these conservative groups. And so the aim behind the project is to say they were trying to understand what was happening with the pandemic and George Floyd and the protests simultaneously. Like, there's got to be an explanation for why all of these are happening and why Black people are being disproportionately affected.
Mhm.
And so when they started to unravel, first they were going to look solely at the pandemic and look at access to healthcare, and they were looking at the Kaiser Foundation, and they figured out how much money Kaiser got, and that's how the whole thing kind of took off. And they said, "Nah, we can't just talk just about the pandemic."
Right. Especially got to put it in context. And
Hmm.
this is where that historical context becomes so pertinent. And as you're talking, I'm reminded of some conversations where, um, well, why are Black people so happy when they graduate from PWIs? Or why are they so happy or talk about this representation? And sometimes it's not about an ideology of wanting to be white, but sometimes it's actually a celebration of look how great we are in spite of. Like, look at all of this systemic approach that has happened um, through Jim Crow, through Black codes, with the conservative philanthropy that you touch on, and still we shine. You can't stop our shine.
Hmm.
And being able to talk about that and address it. Can you just kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there is anything inherently wrong with celebrating your greatness and whatever venue that greatness might be in. You know, we celebrate mediocre white men all the time. And they don't have the same level of obstacles or challenges typically that we do, you know. And I'm talking about, I say in the video in the second half, and I'm just going to use this term, I say we're dealing with more than institutional racism. We're dealing with civilizational racism. That's that whole attitude that I am superior to all of y'all. And
Right.
therefore, I should have dominion over you.
Mhm.
That's a next level. That's more than, you know, microaggressions in a predominantly white institution. That is a belief that I should have control over the earth and all of its resources. And
Yes.
that level, you know, we're working up against that.
Right.
And it's deeply entrenched to the point where it's normative behavior to think that, you know, white men should be in charge, you know. And so I think that there's a celebration of representation. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. What but what needs to happen parallel to representation is action.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm teaching a class, my senior seminar right now, and we talked today about it's a Black Lives Matter focus course,
Okay.
and we talked today about the illusion of Obama. And so we talked about, I showed videos, and the students were like, yeah, he really was just a middle of the road kind of guy. And I said, yeah, but because he looked different and he sounded different than past presidents, it sounded like he was taking up our issues. But if you look back specifically, did he? Not really. You know, there were things he did to help the broader American community, but Black people in particular, no, no.
Mhm.
And that was a political, I mean, and he used a lot of his capital chastising Black folks. You know, well, if you would read to your kids, you know, or if you pull your pants up, and it's like, I could have my pants all the way up to my neck, and that will not stop a cop from shooting, you
Mhm.
know. So I think that um, having the representation of an Obama is good if it's inspiring, but if it needs to inspire action.
Right. It
That's
can't
what's
stop.
been missing. Yeah,
Mm.
so yeah, let's celebrate the fact that you graduated from a predominantly white institution. But now what you gonna do with it?
And how does it affect your people?
Hmm.
And although you graduated from there, did you internalize their ideology as it relates to your own people? Or were you able to stay grounded and now you're using that to create access and open doors like Claudia Hampton and
Yeah.
continue that with that? So that's really, really important. I just looked at the time. So, once you get two academics talking, one of us should look at the time. I guess I should. This has been a great, great conversation. Is there any final points that you want to talk about, whether it relates to your documentary, the book, or just overall Black women, Africana studies? I'm sure you and I will have way more conversations, but I'm going to let you have a final word before we wrap up.
Yeah, you know, I just did a talk for International Women's Day, and the talk was about valuing Black women's work. And I think the one thing that we need to value about Black women's work is that Black women have an outsider within perspective that allows us to see things much more clearly than a lot of other folk. And what I mean by that is you could be in an institution that is not not representative of you, and you can be objective enough because you're an outsider to critique it, you know. And so I think of myself, I'm at Dominguez, and I think I'm part of the Toro family, but I'm also an outsider. And so that outsider allows me to just, I don't have to toe the company line. I can say, y'all acting ugly, y'all doing wrong. It allows me to do that. And that ability to see things for what they are allows you to eventually make change. The problem I think that happens a lot of times, like, you know, folks ask, well, what, how do Black women know? We know because we done experienced it. and and we speak,
Continue to.
yeah, and speak truth to that. And whereas other groups that are embedded in that institution, they can't see it clearly.
Mhm.
And so I think we need to learn how to value that third eye that Black women have.
Mhm. Value it, hold on to it, And also take care of it. I'm very glad that you mentioned saying no as self-care, having community. That is so important when a lot of times we are ultra independent and trying to just do things on our own. But no, um we should hold on to have community and be able to do those things. So we are grateful for anyone who would like to learn more and see the documentary. I have actually put the YouTube link in the chat so you can click it and watch it. It's very great, very informative. Donnie did a great job with that interview. I can't wait to watch the rest of it probably next week during spring break. But we also look forward to your book. Do you have a due date for your book coming out on Claudia Hampton?
No, I'm actually trying to finish two more chapters.
Okay.
COVID slowed things down because the archives I needed to get to have been closed. So the anticipated release would be spring of next year.
Okay. Well, we look forward to it. We know it's going to be great. We cannot wait to invite you back on to have your book tour and do have some type of release. Hopefully, but by that point in time, naturally, we will be back to some in-person events so you can actually sell your books there. Um,
Well, thank you in advance.
yeah. I just need a signed copy. I'm letting you know
Okay.
right now. But we thank you so much for this time. I look forward to many more conversations with you. And with that, everyone, thank you all for watching. Please continue to follow our page for more information about our food bank, our Zoom tutoring, and the events that we have upcoming. And with that, remember that you are more than well and have a great evening. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.